This is Flock and Hive, a place to explore the things you always wanted to know more about, as well as the things you didn't know you wanted to know. And this week,
The point that's really interesting is even people who are incredibly skeptical, when you start talking about their birth chart, it strokes their ego and it feels so lovely to be talked about that most people open up to it. Even if they say it's a load of crap, you can normally mention something and they go, oh, yeah, that is what I'm like.
We speak to Emily Deary about astrology.
hello everybody and welcome back.
Hello. It is episode 8, and it is all about astrology today. I keep falling over my words. It's astronomy, astrology, but they're two very different things, aren't they?
Yes, they are very different things indeed. So it's probably good to just quickly make sure that everyone knows the difference.
Yeah, astrology is centering on zodiac star signs, reading them, and the connection with your personality and that kind of thing, right?
Yes, as opposed to astronomy, which a lot of people confuse with this, which is actually a branch of science that studies everything outside the atmosphere, like the stars and the planets, but it's very traditional science. Yeah, astrology uses these celestial bodies, as astronomy does, but interprets them.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily, excuse the pun, collide, do they?
Well, that's just the thing. I think they do, and I think they should do a lot more. The problem is, I think a lot of people like you and I grew up with just Mystic Megs or literally just a little something in the back of a magazine, which was your star sign. We never really discussed it. Whereas in this conversation with Emily, we talk about certain elements such as birth charts and rising signs and why it helps that we know them. But you and I, we didn't go nearly as far as that, did we, growing up?
Well, the information wasn't there. Plus, I think when we started talking about doing this interview, I realized that I am actually a bit of a naysayer about all this, and I don't want to be. But I think it's because of those little paragraphs you mentioned growing up, where you'd flip to the back of Ms. and we'd learn our fortunes. But we were doing that together, you and you and I are the same star sign. We're both Sagittarius, but also you and I are really different. So I
Mm.
think just from the off, it didn't really make sense because it didn't describe both of us separately, if you know what I mean. So, but what's interesting about this is just being Sagittarius isn't the whole picture, is it?
That's it. It's because those things in the back of Ms. magazine and Just 17 and Cosmo and all of that, which I still love to read, by the way, that it's not giving you any context. That's all the information that we're presented with. No one has ever sat us down, because why would they, and say, this is why you need to know what your star sign is, which is also your sun sign, what your rising sign is, because this is what it can give you.
Those magazines were quite mental, weren't they, looking back?
They were, and I think another reason why we don't necessarily take star signs as seriously is because on one page you'd have, your paragraph about Sagittarius and what your boyfriend's going to do, but then literally on the opposite page you'd have position of the fortnight, as if they might be related.
For really young girls as well. Like we were reading that when we were really young, didn't even really know what the position was for.
Yeah, I know. But that was the point of them. Like Just 17 wasn't for 17-year-olds, was it? It was for teenagers, really, who just felt a bit grown up.
Oh, I totally learnt about the birds and the bees through those magazines. And I think mum actually engineered it that way. We probably figured it out together.
We did, which might explain why we have so many hang-ups, because of the ways things were portrayed.
Oh, and don't forget the quizzes, the very long-winded quizzes, which now there must be like an online version of. Don't you remember the ABC answers? And then it would determine your life. A little bit like the star sign thing. It's like, it was as simple as, do you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate? Then you collate all the multiple choice answers. Do you remember? And then you get a paragraph of your destiny for like the next year based on your reaction to these.
I had completely forgotten about those, but I loved them. But what's interesting is what this shows us is that we're, as humans, we're just all desperate for a little bit of direction and to understand why we're here and why we are the way we are.
You're right. I guess that was an early form of self-searching, really, and yeah, trying to figure yourself out, like an early form of therapy. I wonder if in the magazines, in like the back office, they were like, "They'll be in therapy in 20 years."
Yeah. I'd love to know how they were actually put together.
Yeah, man or woman, what age?
Did you know anything about being Sagittarius before we had this chat, before you might have done any research in terms of like what does it mean to be Sagittarius? Because all I know, if someone says, you're Sagittarius. I'm supposed to have long thighs and be very messy.
Long thighs. Well, you actually do have very long thighs.
I do, but that's really a random thing for my star sign to tell me,
And you are quite messy.
which is also true.
But I don't have long thighs and I'm not messy. Well, this is actually why I'd love to look into my birth chart, and I'm going to. Is later in the interview, Emily explains how you can be quite conflicted in your personality, and I am, because sometimes I'm messy, sometimes I'm really the opposite, and that always confused Dad, didn't it? One day he'd be like, "Your room is disgusting." One day he's like, "Are you okay? Because your room is perfection."
She explains why that might be in this interview, doesn't she? So yeah, we won't give that away.
Yeah. But, I did know, for me, I always thought Sagittarians, because it was fire, we were always really confident and go-getting and very creative. But over the years, I've so much has been attributed to it that I just sort of gave up trying to really understand it. But that's because it was coming from such a simplified lens of not really looking that much deeper.
Well, exactly. And also, did you have any reason to look into that? Because quite frankly, I didn't. So I met Emily through. She was recommended as a painter. So basically, she is an interior stylist. She paints. She's built her own bloody house, and she's pretty hardcore. But what she does is that she brings in elements of like feng shui and color therapy and energy into everything she does. And I didn't know that when I got her in at all. It's only because she spotted some crystals and some like tarot cards things that I've been sort of researching in my room, and sort of felt that she was able to start that conversation.
What is lovely about Emily is this: it wasn't her first and foremost bread and butter job. It's her passion that has grown and sits alongside what she does and really
Yeah.
complements it, isn't it? It's like the cerebral, spiritual versus her physical, constructive job too.
Yeah. She really does do everything with so much love and attention. In fact, there's a word for this, boo.
No shit.
So that word is meraki. Emily does everything to do with painting and decorating with meraki. And what that means is to do something with real soul and real love, and to leave a little bit of you, an essence of you in everything that you create. And it can be any task that you do whatsoever, but it's particularly with creative tasks. And it's a Greek word. It comes from, actually derives from the Turkish word merak, which means labor of love, which is to do something with pleasure. And it just means to do something with passion and undivided attention, and to leave a bit of your soul in it. Isn't that lovely?
That is so beautiful. For me as a creative, that is the holy grail.
Yeah.
You know, I assume, is it a little bit like Ikigai, where you also need to earn money from it and it helps people, but it's your soul's purpose, that kind of thing? It feels a bit similar to that,
Yeah, it feels totally related. If you are able to do something with Meraki, chances are you found your ikigai.
which is word of the week from episode 1, yeah. I'm yet to get to that point with Meraki, but that is my absolute dream, particularly with the kind of artwork I do with my sculpture. It looks at difficult topics, it looks at taboo situations, and it's quite divisive, I've noticed, when I've exhibited stuff. But on the occasions where people have quite a reaction to it and it touches them, it completely validates everything. It validates the hard slog of what it is just to be a creative and a mum in this country, just in terms of the practicalities of making work and making it work and making it pay. So just to hold on to that passion and that, I will keep wanting to say maracas. Meraki? Yeah.
It sounds like Meraki should be the plural of maracas.
It should, yes. Celebratory maracas playing every time you leave a little piece of yourself. What do you do with Meraki?
Good question. Do I do anything with Meraki? Well, yeah, I do actually. And cheesy as it may sound, it's this. I love doing the research for these. I love writing the articles afterwards, and I love recording it with you. And and there is a little bit of myself left. It was quite a lot of myself in this podcast.
I
Yeah.
certainly have a residue of my sister for a few hours after I hear your voice in my sleep.
Oh, I know. Some might say it's the same voice, but anyway. So Emily is the perfect example of somebody who works with Meraki, and I think this is a good time to dive into this conversation where she talks about certain elements of astrology, such as birth charts and rising signs, to tell us why it really is good for us to know this stuff. So here's what Emily Deary had to say. Emily Deary, I'm so happy to be talking to you. Tell us about your journey with astrology.
So when I was very little, there was a book by Linda Goodman in our house, which was like a real 70s style astrology book. And I just loved it. I don't know why. And people would come around and I'd be like, what's your star sign? What's your star sign? And then I'd follow them around reading it to them, and it'd be really irritating. And I was always trying to make the connections. I was trying to put the dots together. And then I think my mum sent me on an astrology course when I was about 14 or 15, and I didn't have enough life experience to be able to put what I was learning in context to people that I knew or myself. So I didn't really finish the course and I didn't do very well. And then maybe even 15 years ago, I started to really pick up the pace. And then 5 years ago, I really started to buy more and more books on it, and then studying and studying and studying. And then every day I'm listening to a little bit more from people that I'm studying from. And it's fascinating. Every day I learn something new about it, and it gives me so much direction, and I feel like I can help people around me so much with insight and advice, whether it's just hold off a minute and pause, or go for it, you've got to get into this, like that's a nice thing to be able to do for people.
Does your family believe in all of this?
My mum did very mildly, hence the 70s astrology books knocking around the house. Dad, absolutely no interest. My sister's got strong Capricorn energy, so she really struggles with believing it. Part of her massively wants to, and part of her just thinks it's a load of shit and really just thinks I should pull myself together, and that it's not, it's just gobbledygook, but she wants to know. And I think the point that's really interesting is even people who are incredibly skeptical, when you start talking about their birth chart, it strokes their ego, and it feels so lovely to be talked about that most people open up to it. Even if they say it's a load of crap, you can normally mention something and they go, oh yeah, that is what I'm like. So and my partner Christo, when I first got together with him and I was looking at his birth chart and I was telling him, he'd be into really aggressive, really active sports, and there were certain things like that I was telling him about, and he was almost annoyed because he thought that he'd strived to be like that, and he was almost annoyed that it was all written down and it was all there. And he was like, but I did judo off my own back for 10 years. And it was like, yeah, but that's because. So some people, it's more annoying for them that it's all written down. It's like we're all just little puppets, and the energy is swirling around with a kind of general gist, and then we can act accordingly, because there is always free will. No matter what's happening energetically and where we're being pulled, we always have the choice of free will as well.
That's good, I think, but I almost wouldn't want it sometimes.
I don't want any fucking free will.
No, just make it happen. Fuck off. So what makes it so irrefutably true to you? Because I can tell that, there is just nothing about this that is not true, that is woo-woo to you. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Once I believe something, for me, that's it. It's super easy. There's been several things in my life where they've come to my awareness, and then that's it. I'm either in or out. And I wonder if with astrology, because I was so young when I started getting into it and looking at the cover of the book, that was it. I was in. I mean, maybe the decision is like, it takes me maybe a few milliseconds of really feeling if there's any truth in it. And then it's just a base gut feeling for me. I mean, I do go through phases of being very obsessively into astrology and looking at it daily, and really seeing the patterns in my life and really analyzing it and trying to make some really good decisions with the energy of the cosmos. And then other times I'll leave it a few weeks where I'm not really reading into things and I'm not really looking at it. And, maybe something really big will happen, and I'll just quickly go back and I'll look at the date and what was happening in the sky. And then, overlay that on my birth chart, and I'll be like, oh, Mars just did this. Mars is like ignition, and it can also sever things. And so it's so easy to see. So when you can look back at dates, you start realizing that so many points in your life, these moments, the patterns are too strong. It's just too powerful for me. The nice thing to know is at least all of us have that somewhere in our chart, and it'll be the thing that you can just make super easy decisions on, which is such a relief, because sometimes we all need that.
God, don't we just? Yeah. So there are a lot of people who still struggle to kind of get on board with this, even if they really, really want to. People like your sister, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything else that you could offer in that regard? Because obviously they can't feel what you're feeling. We know about the moon,
Yeah.
that's irrefutable.
Yeah.
Is there anything else like that?
So one, my first response would be like, that's fine. You've probably just got too much Capricorn, crack on. And my other point would be, I know it's so cliched, but just when you look, if you look out the window, if you live near the sea and you just see the trillions of tons of water being pulled by the moon, like that's the only thing, especially us living in Cowes, where you see all this water pouring in. And it's just this tiny little moon going around our planet that's pulling all of the water to one side of the planet. So the water just follows the moon round. And if we're 70, 80, 90% water, whatever we are, depending on our age, it's pulling us. And water, there's so many books now that talk about water storing emotion. We're getting yanked as well. We're getting pulled around as well. And that's the tiny little moon. So when you talk about Jupiter, which is so enormous, or you talk about, the density on Pluto, or you talk about, Venus, or any of these planets that are close to us, I feel like science will catch up proving this. That's my belief anyway.
I like it. And I will be there to read the thesis if I'm not dead.
I was listening to a talk today by a lady called Marie Manucherry, and she was saying that scientists who are working on quantum theory now realize that if they're thinking about anything when they're looking at these tiny, tiny, tiny quarks or whatever they're looking under the microscope, that they act differently. So they have to be in a meditative state to look at them. Otherwise, the quarks act differently underneath the microscope.
Oh my God. Say her name again.
Marie Manucherry. She's an amazing lady. She just talks about spirituality, and I think she does mediumship and she talks to dead people. She's been a nurse as well, and she was talking about how the science is now just backing up what people have had in their heart and their gut for such a long time.
Have you heard of IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science, which was founded by an astronaut because of his experience out in space? He was determined to find a place that could look into where science and these things other meet. It's a thing, isn't it? Science is catching up. It just needs a different vocabulary. I think people don't really understand how useful this stuff can be. And we're going to talk in a minute about birth charts, what that physically means. I mean, what it looks like, but also how you can use it and how you personally use it. Before we do that, though, can we just do a quick 101 on what zodiac signs are? And then maybe what rising signs mean, those two things, because I think once we know those, talking about birth charts will make more sense.
The zodiac is the name of all 12 Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all the way through, all 12. That's the zodiac. So that could also be your zodiac sign, which constellation of stars the sun was sitting over on the day that you were born.
I think a lot of people don't realize actually that, your star sign, zodiac sign is called that because there is a constellation in the sky that is that shape. And your zodiac sign is also known as your sun sign or your star sign, which can be quite confusing for people like me. But can you tell me, what does this signify, this sun sign? Let's just call it that.
Your sun sign is where you naturally shine. So it's where you're comfortable. For example, if I'm Cancerian sun sign, I really shine being very emotional, being very maternal, and sort of nesting a lot. That's where I just naturally have a natural ability to do it. I wouldn't say it's my driving force. I wouldn't say it's how other people necessarily view me or how I view the world, which takes us back to rising sign or ascendant. So your ascendant or your rising sign is the one that for me is so much more relevant. You would only know this if you know exactly what time you were born, and it's which group of stars were coming up on the horizon the moment you took your first breath. And it changes every 2 hours throughout the day, because obviously the earth rotates 24 hours and there's 12 zodiac signs, so every 2 hours it changes. So in one day there can be 12 different rising signs. So that's where the juiciness is. That's where where you can really get to the nub of stuff and you can really understand it. So if you know your rising sign, you can understand yourself so much better. So it's how you assess the world, it's how you interact with the world, and it's also how people view you. It's the kind of traits that you're known for. It's what you bring to the party. It's, like I've got Scorpio rising, so I make everything really deep, really intense all the time, and maybe too much for people. Like if you're a Leo rising, like my daughter and you and my stepson, you just got this glow about you. People just think you're fun and you're the life and the soul of the party. You're extremely generous and you've just got this glowing warmth. And then if someone was a Virgo rising, they'd be a bit nitpicky and a bit like pointing problems out and pointing things out that were wrong or weren't quite right. So when you know someone's rising sign or you know your own, not only can you really indulge yourself in the positive traits, you can give yourself a bit of a break as well from the things that are a little bit more self-centered, or you can kind of know why you behave the way you do in relation to the world.
And so just to clarify there, if you're comparing that to your sun sign, which is also your star sign, your sun sign is how you really are.
And it's where you shine. It's where you naturally have very natural abilities to do things. So it's just, you just shine in that area. A really good way to get an idea of it is then if you talk about your moon sign. Every 2 days, the moon changes into a different zodiac sign as it goes through the sky. And that's, again, something you could look up. So in relation to that, your moon sign is your inner world. It's your psyche. It's what goes on behind the scenes. It's how you talk to yourself. It's your inner world. You can start to see that some people have brilliant birth charts where you've just got everything in harmony with each other. And other people, you look at their birth charts and they're really battling between two things. They're battling whether to be maternal and homemaker, or really striving for career and money, and this sort of kind of battle. And other people it just all blends really smoothly. So it's another good way of being able to look at it.
So important things are your sun stroke star sign, your rising sign, which is also known as ascendant, and the moon sign.
Yeah, I would say they're the three. If I meet anybody, they're the first three things I want to know about them. I want to say, find out from your mum what time you were born. And none of this like in the afternoon. I need to know exactly what time. When you know someone's ascendant, you can just enjoy them so much more, because you can be what they need from you as well. It's just wonderful.
What are your thoughts on when birth has had to have some human intervention, like a C-section or an induction or anything?
Yeah. So when I was younger, I used to feel really annoyed about it. Like, my daughter was 9 days overdue and they wanted to induce me, and I felt absolutely like it was so important that she came out when she needed to come out. But I also think, in the bigger picture, of course, your soul has chosen to be C-section. I think I've come more to the point now where I believe that everything is exactly as it's meant to be. So the moment you get taken out of your mum, you take your first breath. Whether or not it was natural, I don't think it matters, because I think your soul knows the bigger picture.
Before we get stuck into what a birth chart physically looks like, what I'm understanding from you is a reason to do that in the first place. It just teaches you about yourself and about people that you love, and it helps you understand why they are the way they are, and why you are the way you are, and you can just give yourself and each other a bit of a break.
Yeah, absolutely. And be kind to each other. One of my best friends has got tons of Sagittarius, which is freedom and independence, and tons of Taurian, which is like not wanting change and everything to stay the same. And she's so conflicted. She finds it so hard to be proactive and do anything. So I can just love her. I know that she's not that you'd ever call anybody lazy, but some people might look at her and go, come on. And I just know she's got that inner battle. So all she needs from me is just acceptance and love, no matter what. Do you know what I mean? Because I can see that she's struggling with that.
So let's talk about charts, because like before I met you, I'd heard that term, but literally I don't know does that look like a bar chart?
So it's a very, very simplified drawing of the sky. It looks like a pie with 12 slices, and it basically is the imprint of the sky on the moment that you took your first breath, which you carry for life, and that never changes. So it's where all the planets were in relation to you on Earth. It's where all of the zodiac signs were in relation to you on the Earth. Each segment is related to an area of your life, and it has a zodiac sign in it.
Is another way of looking at that as if you took a snapshot of the sky, that very moment that you were born and you took your first breath, and then you overlaid a template of that circle.
Yeah. If you're just talking about birth chart, it's just a snapshot of the sky. And then you can imagine all the planets, all the 10 planets will be in various places dotted around in this pizza, but it's where they were in the sky on the moment that you were born. That's it.
What's a house?
Each house represents an area of your life.
Okay, so those 12 segments are your houses.
Yeah. Everybody has a different zodiac sign in every house. Once you know your rising sign, that's it. It will never change. It's just what was there.
Can you give us a really quick rundown of these houses?
Yeah, love this. First house, it's how you come out into the world. It's what people know you as. It's your physical body. You know very much what they're going to physically look like. And it's the oomph you come into the world with. Your second house, it's what you accumulate, is your wealth. It's what you attract to yourself, and it's your self-worth. Third house is everything: siblings, local environment, cousins, learning, thinking, school. Fourth house is where you come from. It's your ancestral line. It's the mother. It's your home, where you go to feel safe. Fifth house is bloody wonderful. It's fun, romance, play, and creativity. It's also children and casual sex. Like, so it's where you have fun. It's where you have loads of fun and you're absolutely your most creative. And you think about having a child is the most creative thing you can possibly do. You've created another human. So it's all of everything creative, which is wonderful. Sixth house, a little bit more boring. It's work. It's what you do day to day. It might not even be your job. It's the physical work that you do day in, day out. Your seventh house, it's your relationships, it's your one-on-one relationships. So it can be business partnerships. It's definitely your spouse or your, or who you're having an emotional relationship with. Your eighth house gets a bit weird. It's kind of sex, death, rebirth. It's also inheritance, tax, big chunky money, things that are hidden away. Ninth house is wonderful. It's higher learning, spirituality, travel, faith, religion a little bit. 10th house is your career and your public reputation. So it's what you take out into the world. It's kind of what you want to be known for. It's what you'd like on your gravestone when you're, she was this. It's what you want to be known for. Your 11th house is groups and community. It's people who help you realize your dreams. It's the people around you that bring your life into fruition. But if you've got big friendship groups, that's often part of that house. And 12th house is how we retreat, how we pull away. It's the point that we join back with source and our higher selves.
And you can tell this by looking at your chart, because that will say which planets were where according to your exact time of place of birth, basically. So this will tell you what's in your houses, essentially.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, God, you can tell that I don't know anything about this.
Once you've learned the planet symbols and the zodiac symbols, it makes life so much easier. The houses are fascinating. And then all of the planets that go in all of those houses, Mars, for example, is how you fight. It's what really drives you. So, your Mars is passion. It's how you have sex, but it's your get up and go. So you can imagine if you've got that in a very fiery zodiac sign, you're a really fiery person. Whereas if you've got your Mars in a more feminine sign that's more watery or more gentle, your get up and go is a little bit more, well, maybe not. I think in Roman times, they used to put people who had Mars in Scorpio or Mars in Aries at the front line in war, because the fight in them was so huge that, I mean, if the Romans were doing that, Mars in Libra, right, get to the back.
So that's why because you obviously you've done my chart and we've talked about it briefly, but we haven't done a deep dive, so I don't really know. You do.
Yeah.
You've often said to me that I've got Jupiter in a particular house, which means it's no.
Oh, Jupiter is wonderful. So there's malefic planets and benefic planets. Is that the right word? So malefic planets is things where you struggle a little bit. So Saturn is where you've got to do lots of homework and lots of digging foundations. But Jupiter is a wonderful planet. It's expansion and growth and ease and grace. And it's where things fall in your lap and they're just wonderful and opportunities open up. So for you, a really good example is that you've got Jupiter in your 12th house. The 12th house is a bit unusual. It's the last house. It's where we pull away from society. It's where we recluse. It's how we regenerate and heal ourselves. It's very spiritual house. It's almost where you go back and meet the divine. So if you've got Jupiter there, you will expand and grow when you're pulling away. When you've detached yourself from society and you are completely separate, that's when magic will start to happen. That's when you will start to grow and expand. So if you don't give yourself that time, 12th house is also like mental institutes. It's anything away from society, mental institutes, prisons. If you're not giving yourself that time away, you almost would take yourself away from society, because that's your Jupiter. Give yourself some time off.
What I love about you saying that is you've just validated for me why I need to disappear after,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
after hosting and doing all this stuff. And I've
Yeah.
always felt really guilty
Yeah.
about it. My
Yeah.
lovely husband, who will be listening to this, struggles to understand that.
Jupiter is growth. All of my huge growth moments have been, living in Bolivia or all of these things. Your huge, growth moments are going to be when you're separate and away from everyone. But it's hard. It's really hard. And there'll be people that absolutely do not have that. They'll have Jupiter in their sixth house in day-to-day routines where all they want is people and all the time. Life really full. That'll make them feel like they can grow. Do you know what I mean? So
But this for me tells me exactly why knowing about your birth chart and the birth charts of those people you love is so important, because you can
yeah,
give each other that space and that,
yeah.
that time for understanding. So who puts together a chart? I mean, can anyone do it? It's just, but you can now put it in an app, you said as well. You can
Yeah, I mean,
generate
there's so many, so many. If you put in free birth chart online, just come up.
that. Hmm.
And often a lot of them will do free readings, which aren't great because they're done by computers, so they don't look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's a really, really good place to start. It's definitely where I started
Hmm.
learning, because you can understand your Mars, you can understand, Venus is a great planet to look at. It's how you show love and how you feel loved. So knowing where your Venus is a really wonderful thing to know. So my daughter, I know she's got Venus in Virgo. So she feels love through me doing really boring, mundane things like bringing her glasses of water and, really boring things, being like, oh, here's some hairbands. It's so basic and so easy. I've got Venus in Gemini. So the way I feel absolutely loved and show my love is through communicating and talking and sharing ideas. My partner has got Venus in Sagittarius. So to him, love is freedom. It's really important. If he's not free, he doesn't actually feel loved.
It's love languages, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've done this alongside your work, though, for years, really, haven't you? You paint, you build stuff, but it's
Yeah.
always with a bit of a
Oh,
spiritual
yeah.
nod, isn't it?
Yeah. I feel like for me, keeping earthed and doing physical tasks whilst talking to clients about what their birth chart says, for me, is absolute heaven. I can't think of a combination of two things that I'd love to do more. It's just perfect for me.
Right. So where can people find you?
I am emilyandcolour.com and I'm based on the Isle of Wight, and I will paint your lounge and talk to you about your birth chart.
And probably ask you lots of questions about periods and labor.
Yeah, periods and do you love your mother instantly? I try and ask a couple of questions first before I launch into that. Do you feel loved by your mother? Do you? I've got these little sort of like these cleansing mats that I put the paint on, so all the paint that goes on the walls is cleansed, and I'll always mentally clear a room once I've painted it of any negative or unwanted energy. I just think sometimes I've almost got my sign written on the side of my van of what I do, and then I've got an invisible sign that says, and let's expand each other's consciousness. Do you know what I mean? I always feel like people can see that invisible sign as well. So it's just little nice things that happen.
For our listeners, you've been working your way through our house. So literally, I'm going to run out of room.
Yeah.
We're going to have to start again just so we can keep talking. But what's been so interesting is every time you finished a room, the whole family flocks to it.
Moves in.
The animals flock to it. I can't keep them out of my little study now. No,
It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like you've let me be more creative than anybody else I've ever worked for. And I've got Jupiter going through my fifth house. So that's why. You were
ah,
there just when I needed you. Jupiter, expansion, growth, grace, moving through my house of creativity. You couldn't make it up.
well, sometimes. Well, I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface, so I'm sure there'll be a conversation another time. But for now, Emily Deary, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Infinite blessings to you, gorgeous lady. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm understanding more now, I think.
Good.
Yeah, no, she's wrapped that up really well. I definitely get it more, though it's still really complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I went online to a birth chart generator and put in all my information, and reams of this description of myself came up, and it was quite overwhelming. And loads of charts and tables with little icons and logos and the degree of where a certain planet was. So I feel like I need to park this and actually be able to invest some more time, or maybe just actually get it done for me and get it read. But the generator was quite aware that it was a computer as well, which I quite liked that. It's like, bear in mind that you might want to look into this in a more human level.
Oh, that's interesting, because you said did it ask you for your time of birth, and do you know it?
So mum's said 11 a.m. she thinks, so I just whacked that in.
Hmm. Okay, because I mean, Emily is very clear that she wants the exact minute, but who really knows that? I certainly didn't. And I'm sure that a lot of people will be asking the same questions. What if I don't know the exact time of day I was born? And what she says to do is to go and see a kinesiologist who can tell you the exact time of day you were born. We did touch on kinesiology in previous episodes, but just briefly, it's somebody who reads your muscles basically and believes that your body can give answers even if your brain doesn't know the answers to those things. So and I had a really interesting experience with the same kinesiologist that Emily uses, actually, because mum had told me for years that I was born around 7 p.m. But then I asked her more recently when Emily said, go find out what your exact time of birth was. And mum said, oh, I can't remember, somewhere between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m., I think. Really helpful. And so I thought, do you know what? I've got a kinesiology session booked in. I'm just going to ask. And I asked, and I didn't say roughly what time of day. I said, I've got an idea, but I don't know. And without blinking, kinesiologist said 7:12, around about there, somewhere in between 10 past, but before quarter past. I can't be more specific than that. And I'm like, a PM this is. And given that's exactly what I had in mind, I was quite chuffed with that.
Wow. But that also explains, doesn't it? Because you and I are both Sagittarius, but we're really different. But it just goes to show then it's the time of day we were born, which provides those complexities, those differences between us.
Well, it can, because it is important, because I think every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes or so might make a difference to what planet is in what house and where. So it does matter. Maybe within a half hour is more or less okay. So yeah, I guess it's important if you can find out. It's a nice thing to know.
Yeah.
We mentioned before that I think a lot of people our age, yeah, we kind of just haven't ever thought about it because it's just been relegated to the back of a magazine, really, hasn't it? But really, I think with these astrological events, like this week, we've had an eclipse at the same time as Mercury retrograde and a brand new moon. And what that seems to mean is that people are a bit more interested than they might normally have been.
Well, I think spiritual awareness and people seeking these things is so much more at the forefront, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about how COVID has sort of shifted towards this direction of asking more questions and wanting to, learn these things a bit more. Whenever we do these podcasts, I always ask Google a really basic question just to see what the general sort of feeling around astrology is. And one nice little snippet I found was just on why we as human beings seek these things, like seek to learn about astrology. And it just said, astrology may stimulate our natural tendency towards patterns, priming us to seek meaning in the predictable movements of the cosmos. And you touched on that earlier before the interview about how we do have that tendency, that leaning towards wanting to discover ourselves and see where we belong and see how we can navigate life. And I think getting invested in astrology can really provide that to you.
And as we get older, we're seeking different things. I think, when we were younger, it was all about boyfriends and stuff like that. Whereas I think as we get older, it's more about the meaning of life and why we are the way we are. And I just genuinely think it's fascinating because, to be honest, if you look into it and it doesn't resonate with you, you can just sort of leave it alone. But if any of it does, it can actually feel quite helpful. One thing that really struck me during the conversation with Emily was about how knowing some of these things about yourself and your partner, it's a bit like learning your own love languages. And so if you know that, if you're armed with that information, it's just going to make your relationship so much easier.
Yeah, and kind of cuts out the therapist as well, doesn't it, in a way? If you're in a marriage and you're both, up for having a look at your birth charts and seeing if it resonates in any way, even it just creating a conversation about, oh, you are quite like that. When you're like that, I feel like that. That's actually kickstarts just some very basic communication that all marriages need, but probably don't have. Because when do you sit down and talk about your personality types? And that probably only ever happens when you're having an argument. And so it's just always like character assassination. Whereas if you did the opposite and sat down like, oh, you are good when your Jupiter's in Aries, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and also it's a little bit more objective. So yeah, when you go to therapy, it's more like he said, she said. But if it's sort of literally written in the stars, you could just you can it makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it? It's like, well, this is the way I am. You know, my Jupiter apparently is in my 12th house, which is why to grow and expand, I need time by myself to process, and I run away. And you know that I do that. My husband knows that I do that, and he hates it. But that's because his version of that is having people around him all the time. That's how he expands and grows, by through having lots of conversations and being sociable, etc. It's the opposite of me.
But it's not just helpful for relationships, is it? It's helpful for yourself.
Totally. And I think that's the point. It's like, if you've got this information, you can be kinder to yourself and to each other. That's what she says.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't touch on, but I'd love to at some point, is what happens when new planets and things come up, because there was Chiron, the wounded healer, which could have been a planet, I think, or an asteroid, and that was discovered in 1977, although of course it's always been there. And just like what that means for a birth chart.
Well, funny you should say that, because in 2016, in quite a casual blog post, NASA referred to this constellation, which is called Ophiuchus. Not sure I'm saying it the right way, even though I've actually done that Google thing where you play it, but my brain cannot take the information. So Ophiuchus, I think it casually referred to it as the 13th star sign, which dates overlap Sagittarius. So it would have actually definitely affected both of us. We would have actually now been Ophiuchus.
Oh, really?
Yes, which would have, if we were really invested and attached to our Sagittarianism, which we have been known to call our saggy hairy ass. Um,
I only ever call it a saggy, hairy ass.
if we were really attached, that would have been a real problem. And it was a real massive problem for people. The reality was, it's actually been there forever. The Babylonians who created the zodiac actually knew it was there. They just decided not to include it because they wanted 12 star signs to fit their 12-month calendar. And so astronomy and astrologers have always known about it. But what was interesting was the attachment people had to their own star signs, which they felt completely defined by, and the how unsettled and outraged so many people were. They were genuinely anxious about it. Like, it made them feel they'd lost their identity. And that's really powerful that people invest that much in it.
Yeah, and it's totally understandable. But let's just be clear, like from what you've said, there wasn't a 13th zodiac sign, just but somebody took this and ran with it and then tried to make out that actually everything had shifted when it hasn't. It's just like there are the 12 signs of the zodiac. There's a 13th one that could have been there but wasn't, and it's not going to make any difference to anything.
But you could also argue that the whole premise of the Babylonians just deciding to not include it kind of gives the feeling of human intervention here, which suddenly takes away from, hold on, is it written in the stars, or did someone actually just decide this? So I think that could, give the naysayers out there a little bit of fire in their belly. And I think that's a conversation that suddenly was just brought to the forefront, but it got that conversation of astrology out and about. And again, I just found it really showed how quite divisive, people are either really into it or they're real naysayers. There doesn't seem to be an in between.
There doesn't, but I have looked a bit at what happens when new stars are discovered, or planets like Chiron we mentioned, and the consensus seems to be like it doesn't change anything that has been said before. It just offers us a new opportunity to take an even deeper dive into something, so you could really, really expand on what you already know. And I quite like that as an explanation.
Yeah, and upon further reading of this whole Ophiuchus furore, was exactly that. The astrology community were like, well, yes, the Earth is changing on its axis. Things are completely developing. Nothing is static, and we're all moving with it. We're all fluid, and so we expect things to change just as we do throughout our lives. So that completely makes sense that new things are discovered as well, especially with actual technology.
Yeah.
Emily is very absolute with this, isn't she? It is fact, it is her life's work. And I'm quite envious of that.
Yeah, it's quite nice to be like that, isn't it? Just black and white about certain things, especially such things as this.
Yeah, where people must question you a lot and you probably have to explain yourself all the time.
Yeah, and she just doesn't feel she has to necessarily. It's like, if it's not for you, then jog on, she basically says. Yes. Well, we are here to ask all the questions like that, aren't we?
one day we'll run out of questions and there'll be no podcast.
Yeah, but that's a long, long way away. Don't you all worry. Well, on that note, I think it's time to draw episode number 8 to a close. Thank you so much, Emily Deary.
And if you want to find out more about Emily and birth charts, there are articles on the website at flockandhive.com. And be sure to follow us at Flock and Hive on all the socials.
And don't forget that we would also love to hear from you if you come across anything that you think we should be talking about, or if you want to come onto the podcast as one of our gurus. But until then, thank you so much once again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.